In the autumn of 1892, guests checked into the Blackwood Hotel, but they never checked out, and the town knew exactly why. Before we begin this chilling journey into the shadows of rural Pennsylvania, I want to know, where are you listening to this story from? Are you tucked safely in your home, or perhaps walking alone through dimly lit streets? Whatever your location, you're about to discover that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural, they're human. If you're enjoying this dark tale, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends. Now, let's step back in time to 1892, to a place where politeness masked unspeakable secrets. The locomotive's whistle cut through the thick Pennsylvania fog like a knife through fabric, announcing the arrival of the 4:17 afternoon train at Millbrook Station. Among the handful of passengers who descended onto the weathered platform, two would soon find their fates intertwined in ways neither could imagine. Clara Whitmore stepped carefully onto the wooden planks, her traveling dress already dampened by the persistent mist that clung to everything in this forsaken corner of the state. At 28, she carried herself with the careful composure of a woman who had learned to navigate the world alone. Her brother Thomas had disappeared 3 months ago during a business trip through rural Pennsylvania. His last letter had been posted from Millbrook, mentioning his stay at a respectable establishment called the Blackwood Hotel. After that, silence. The local authorities had been maddeningly unhelpful. "Travelers come and go, Miss Whitmore," the sheriff had written in response to her inquiries. "Your brother likely continued his journey and forgot to write. Men can be forgetful creatures." But Clara knew Thomas. He was methodical, reliable, and he would never simply vanish without word, especially when he knew she depended on his support. 50 feet away, adjusting his worn leather satchel, stood Daniel Pierce, a journalist from Philadelphia whose career had been built on exposing uncomfortable truths. At 34, he had developed a reputation for investigative pieces that made powerful people nervous. His editor had dismissed his latest lead as paranoid nonsense, but Daniel's instincts had been honed by years of following trails others overlooked. Over the past 18 months, Daniel had been tracking a disturbing pattern. 7 individuals, businessmen, traveling salesmen, even a school teacher, had disappeared along the same stretch of rural Pennsylvania. The only common thread, all had last been seen in or around Millbrook. The local newspaper mentions were brief, dismissive. Continued journey west. Relocated without notice. But families were left behind, questions unanswered, and Daniel smelled something rotten beneath the surface. The station master, an elderly man with clouded eyes and a deeply lined face, eyed both newcomers with barely concealed wariness. "You'll be wanting the hotel, I expect," he said, his voice carrying the flat inflection of someone who had given up caring long ago. "Only proper lodging in town. Follow the main road north, about 2 miles. Can't miss it." Clara approached him, her voice steady, despite the unease creeping along her spine. "I'm looking for information about my brother, Thomas Whitmore. He stayed at the Blackwood Hotel this past summer. Perhaps you remember him?" The station master's expression became carefully neutral, a mask sliding into place with practiced ease. "Many travelers pass through, miss. Can't say I recall the name. Best speak with Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood at the hotel. They keep the guest records." Daniel, who had been observing this exchange while pretending to examine his luggage, noted the slight tremor in the old man's hands, the way his eyes darted toward the darkening tree line, as if afraid of being overheard even in this empty space. The walk to the Blackwood Hotel took them through landscape that seemed deliberately designed to unsettle. Ancient oaks lined the muddy road, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little remained of the afternoon light. The fog grew thicker with each step, muffling sound until even their footfalls seemed absorbed by the oppressive atmosphere. Clara noticed Daniel walking parallel to her path, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly heading to the same destination. Finally, she broke the silence. "Are you traveling on business, sir?" Daniel considered his response carefully. Something about this woman's bearing suggested she was here for more than tourism. In a manner of speaking, Daniel Pierce, from Philadelphia. I'm a journalist investigating certain irregularities in the region. Clara Whitmore, from Boston. She studied his face, seeing both intelligence and a certain hardness that came from witnessing too many of humanity's darker aspects. My brother disappeared near here. I'm trying to find out what happened to him. Before Daniel could respond, the Blackwood Hotel materialized through the fog like a ship emerging from heavy seas. It was a substantial structure, 3 stories of dark wood, with a steeply pitched roof and dozens of windows that reflected the dying light like dead eyes. Smoke curled from multiple chimneys, and warm light glowed from the ground floor windows, creating an illusion of welcome that somehow felt fundamentally wrong. A painted sign hung above the wide front porch. Blackwood Hotel, established 1867, respectable lodging for discriminating travelers. They mounted the front steps together, an unspoken agreement forming between them. The front door opened before either could knock, revealing a tall woman in her early 50s, dressed in impeccable black silk with her steel-grey hair pulled severely back. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem welcoming, but with an underlying coldness that never reached her eyes. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth as oil. "I am Mrs. Adelaide Blackwood. Welcome to our establishment. You must be exhausted from your journey. Please come in from this dreadful fog." The interior of the hotel was surprisingly luxurious for such a remote location. The lobby featured polished wood floors, expensive wallpaper in deep burgundy, brass fixtures that gleamed in the lamplight, and furniture that spoke of considerable investment. A grand staircase curved upward to the upper floors, its banister elaborately carved. Yet despite the obvious care and expense, something felt subtly off. The air held a faint, unidentifiable smell, not quite unpleasant, but wrong somehow. The many framed photographs on the walls showed the hotel in various stages of its history, but notably absent were any images of satisfied guests or family gatherings. And the silence was too complete, too heavy for a building that should house multiple guests. Mr. Josiah Blackwood emerged from a door behind the front desk, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed his whiskey. His smile was broader than his wife's, but equally unconvincing. "Ah, new arrivals. Splendid, splendid. We pride ourselves on hospitality here at the Blackwood. Absolute discretion and comfort. That's our motto." Clara approached the desk, her heart hammering. "I'm inquiring about a former guest, my brother Thomas Whitmore. He stayed here in July." Something flickered across both Blackwood's faces, too quick to identify but unmistakably there. Adelaide consulted a leather-bound ledger with theatrical slowness. Whitmore. Ah, yes. Room 207. Stayed 3 nights. Checked out on July 19th, as I recall. Pleasant gentleman. Mentioned he was continuing west. Did he leave any forwarding address? Any indication of where he was heading?" "I'm afraid not, dear. Guests come and go. We don't pry into their affairs." Adelaide's smile remained fixed. "I'm sure he's quite well. Young men can be thoughtless about staying in touch." Daniel stepped forward, his journalist's instincts fully engaged. "I'd like a room for at least a week. And I wonder, do you keep records of all your guests? I'm researching travel patterns through rural Pennsylvania for a series of articles." Josiah's bonhomie dimmed slightly. "We value our guests' privacy, Mr. Pierce. Daniel Pierce. Mr. Pierce. The Blackwood has maintained its reputation precisely because we are discreet. Our records are confidential." His tone, while still polite, carried an unmistakable warning. As they completed the check-in process, Clara assigned to room 203, Daniel to room 218, the journalist noticed several details that his trained eye catalogued automatically. The guest ledger, glimpsed briefly, showed surprisingly few names for such a large establishment. Several room keys hung on the board behind the desk, but others were conspicuously absent, despite no visible guests in the lobby or dining area. And when Josiah thought himself unobserved, his jovial expression vanished entirely, replaced by something cold and calculating. A young man appeared to carry their luggage, pale, thin, with eyes that seemed to look through rather than at them. He moved with mechanical efficiency, never speaking, never quite making eye contact. When Clara tried to tip him, he flinched as if struck before hurrying away. "That's Michael," Adelaide explained smoothly. "Good worker, but simple-minded. Doesn't speak. We give him employment out of Christian charity." Their rooms were on different floors, but similar in their appointments. Clean, comfortable, with heavy curtains, solid furniture, and locks that seemed unnecessarily robust. Clara's room overlooked the rear of the property, where she could just make out the shapes of outbuildings through the fog. Daniel's faced the front, giving him a view of the road and the surrounding forest. As Clara unpacked her few belongings, she noticed something odd. The wardrobe was deep, far deeper than the room's dimensions should allow. Curious, she opened it fully and rapped on the back panel. The sound was hollow, suggesting empty space beyond. Before she could investigate further, a dinner bell rang from somewhere below. The dining room reinforced Clara's growing unease. Tables were set for perhaps 20 guests, but only she and Daniel were present, along with an elderly couple who ate in complete silence, their eyes downcast. The meal was excellently prepared, roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, but the oppressive quiet made every scrape of cutlery sound unnaturally loud. Adelaide presided over the meal from a small desk near the kitchen door, her watchful presence preventing any casual conversation. Yet Clara noticed the woman's attention kept drifting to a door beneath the main staircase, a door that, unlike all others, had 3 separate locks. After dinner, as guests retired to their rooms, Clara intercepted Daniel in the shadowy hallway. "Something is very wrong here," she whispered urgently. "My brother would never have left without contacting me. And did you notice the missing guests, the frightened staff, the excessive locks, and the fact that this place feels more like a prison than a hotel?" Daniel finished quietly. "Yes, Miss Whitmore. I noticed all of that and more. I propose we compare observations. Your room or mine?" They chose Clara's room, judging it slightly more private. For the next hour they shared their concerns and suspicions, each detail adding to a picture neither wanted to acknowledge but could no longer ignore. 7 disappearances, Daniel said, spreading his notes across the small writing desk. "All last confirmed near Millbrook. All seemingly vanished into thin air. And now, your brother makes 8. Clara's hands trembled as she held Thomas's last letter. He wrote that he felt uneasy here but couldn't explain why. Said something felt carefully arranged, like a stage set. Those were his exact words. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. They fell silent immediately, watching the thin line of light beneath the door. A shadow passed, paused, then moved on. They waited 5 full minutes before speaking again, this time in barely audible whispers. "Tomorrow," Daniel proposed, "we need to explore this building thoroughly. There are too many locked doors, too many questions. Whatever is happening here, the Blackwoods are at the center of it." Clara nodded, though fear clutched at her heart. "I'm going to find out what happened to Thomas, no matter what." As Daniel prepared to leave, slipping back to his own room under cover of checking the hallway first, Clara caught his arm. "Mr. Pierce, be careful. I have the distinct feeling that guests who ask too many questions in this hotel don't leave." "Then we'll have to make sure we do, Miss Whitmore. Good night." Alone in her room, Clara lay awake for hours, listening to the old building settle and creak around her. But other sounds disturbed her attempts at rest. Footsteps in empty corridors, muffled voices from behind walls, and once, distinctly, what sounded like a cry quickly smothered. She rose and went to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. The fog had lifted slightly, and by the pale moonlight she could see the outbuildings more clearly, One appeared to be a large barn or stable. Another might have been a storage shed, but the third, set furthest from the main building and surrounded by a high fence, had no visible windows and seemed built with unusual solidity for a simple outbuilding. As she watched, a figure emerged from the hotel's rear door, Josiah Blackwood, carrying a lantern and something else she couldn't quite make out. He crossed the yard and entered the windowless building. For perhaps 20 minutes his light was visible through cracks in the walls. Then he emerged empty-handed and returned to the hotel. Clara let the curtain fall back into place, her heart racing. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find a way to investigate those outbuildings. Whatever secret the Blackwood Hotel was hiding, she was certain it lay somewhere beyond the main structure. She finally drifted into uneasy sleep as dawn approached, unaware that in the walls around her, carefully concealed eyes watched, and that her arrival and Daniel's had already set in motion events that could lead to either terrible discovery or permanent silence. In her dreams, Thomas called to her from somewhere dark and close, his voice urgent, but the words impossible to understand. She reached for him through suffocating darkness, but he remained just beyond her grasp, always receding, always calling. She woke with a start to find full daylight filtering through the curtains and the sound of activity in the hotel below. The nightmare faded, but the unease remained. Today, she thought, gathering her courage, today we start finding answers. The morning brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere that permeated the Blackwood Hotel. Clara descended to breakfast with a deliberately casual air, though every nerve in her body screamed warnings. The dining room held only 3 other guests besides herself and Daniel, the silent elderly couple from the previous evening and a middle-aged businessman who seemed utterly absorbed in his newspaper, never once looking up. Daniel caught her eye briefly, a slight nod indicating he'd spent the night making observations. They ate in silence, both aware of Adelaide Blackwood's watchful presence from her customary position near the kitchen entrance. The woman's dark eyes seemed to track every movement, every glance exchanged between her newest guests. After breakfast, Clara approached Adelaide with her most innocent smile. "Mrs. Blackwood, I noticed some lovely outbuildings from my window. Do you keep gardens? I'm quite fond of horticulture." Adelaide's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "I'm afraid the grounds are off limits to guests, Miss Whitmore. For safety reasons, you understand. The structures are old, potentially dangerous. We wouldn't want anyone injured." "Of course. How thoughtful." Clara retreated, but not before noticing the ring of keys at Adelaide's waist, far more than would be needed for guest rooms alone. Daniel, meanwhile, had engaged Josiah in conversation about the hotel's history, playing the role of interested journalist, gathering color for his articles. 25 years in operation? Quite impressive for such a remote location. You must have remarkable repeat business. Josiah's laugh was hearty but hollow. "Indeed, Mr. Pierce, our guests appreciate discretion above all else. Many return regularly, though, of course, we never discuss who stays with us. Privacy is sacred at the Blackwood." "And do you employ many local workers? I'd love to interview some long-time residents about the area's history." The friendliness drained from Josiah's face like water from a broken vessel. "We keep our staff to a minimum. The fewer people involved in our operations, the better we maintain our standards. I'm sure you understand, too many cooks, as they say. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." As the proprietor retreated to his office behind the front desk, Daniel noticed him locking the door with 3 separate keys, the same pattern of excessive security he'd observed throughout the building. What exactly were they protecting? Or more disturbingly, what were they containing? Clara spent the morning exploring the public areas of the hotel with apparent aimlessness, but her keen eyes missed nothing. The ground floor layout was straightforward: lobby, dining room, parlor, and a small library, but certain details troubled her. The library's collection was oddly sparse for such an old establishment, the books mostly cheap novels and outdated almanacs. Several bore inscriptions, property of Edmund Carver, Catherine Mills, 1891, to James, with love, personal books, not hotel furnishings. Whose possessions were these, and how had they come to be part of the Blackwood's meager library? In the parlor, she discovered something more disturbing. Behind a heavy chair, partially hidden by shadow, she found scratches on the wall, deliberate marks, as if someone had been keeping count of days. She bent closer, her heart pounding. 23 marks, then they stopped. Whoever had made them had either left or been prevented from continuing. A sound behind her made Clara spin around. Michael, the silent young man who'd carried their luggage, stood in the doorway. His pale face showed obvious distress, and his hands twisted together nervously. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then, slowly, he raised one finger to his lips, a clear warning for silence. His other hand pointed urgently toward the front door, then made a pushing motion. "Leave! Get out!" Before Clara could react, Adelaide's voice rang out from the hallway. "Michael, there you are, you lazy creature! Get to the kitchen immediately!" The young man flinched violently and scurried away, but not before casting one last desperate look at Clara. She stood frozen, her blood running cold. Michael could speak, or at least understand clearly enough to warn her. His muteness was either feigned or enforced. Either way, it suggested he was as much a prisoner here as a guest who couldn't leave. Meanwhile, Daniel had made his way to the 3rd floor, ostensibly looking for a quiet place to work on his articles. The top floor was dimmer than the lower levels, the hallway narrower. Most doors were locked, the rooms presumably unoccupied. But as he passed room 307, he heard something that stopped him cold, a voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from within. "Please, someone, help." Daniel glanced quickly down the hallway. Empty. He knocked softly. "Hello? Are you all right in there?" The voice fell silent immediately, replaced by scuffling sounds. Then nothing. Daniel tried the handle. Locked, of course. He knocked again, more urgently. "I'm a guest here. If you need help." Heavy footsteps on the stairs made him straighten quickly, moving away from the door. Josiah appeared at the landing, his face darkening when he saw Daniel. "Mr. Pierce, guests are not permitted on the 3rd floor. This area is reserved for long-term residents who value their privacy. I apologize. I was simply looking for a quiet place to work and got turned around. The parlor and library are available for guests' use. Now, if you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. As Josiah escorted him firmly downstairs, Daniel memorized the layout. Room 307, northeast corner. 3 locks on the door, just like the mysterious door beneath the main staircase, and someone inside was being held against their will. He was certain of it. That afternoon, Clara and Daniel managed a brief, whispered conference in the library while pretending to browse the sparse collection. They shared their discoveries, the scratched wall marks, Michael's warning, the locked rooms, the voice behind door 307. "Tonight," Daniel proposed quietly, keeping his eyes on his book, "we need to investigate properly. Whatever is happening here, it's beyond mere suspicion now. People are being held in this building." Clara nodded, though fear made her hands shake. "The outbuildings too. I watched Josiah go into that windowless structure last night. He was carrying something. Then we split up. I'll search the 3rd floor and try to access that locked door under the stairs. You see what you can find outside." "How will we get keys?" Daniel's smile was grim. "Who said anything about keys? I've picked a few locks in my investigative career. Tonight, after midnight, when the Blackwoods think we're sleeping." The remainder of the day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Clara tried to occupy herself with needlework in the parlor, though her hands proved too unsteady for delicate work. The elderly couple sat nearby, still silent, but she noticed something new. Fading bruises on the woman's wrists, barely visible beneath her long sleeves. When the woman caught Clara looking, pure terror flashed across her face before she looked away. What hold did the Blackwoods have over these people? Were they guests or prisoners, or had the line between the two become so blurred it no longer mattered? Dinner that evening was an even more oppressive affair than the previous night. Adelaide and Josiah both presided over the meal, their eyes constantly roving from guest to guest. The food was excellent: roast beef, potatoes au gratin, fresh vegetables, but Clara could barely taste it. Across the dining room, Daniel ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. After the meal, as guests drifted toward their rooms, Clara made a show of requesting extra blankets from Adelaide. "I find I'm quite sensitive to cold," she explained. "The room feels rather drafty." "Of course, Miss Whitmore, I'll have Michael bring them up shortly." Adelaide's smile was all politeness, but her eyes held something else. Calculation, perhaps, or suspicion. True to her word, Michael appeared at Clara's room 15 minutes later with a stack of heavy quilts. When she opened the door, he glanced quickly down the hallway, then pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand before hurrying away without a sound. Clara's heart hammered as she unfolded the paper, her hands trembling. The handwriting was crude, as if written by someone barely literate, but the message was clear. "Don't eat the food they give special. Drugged, basement bad, barn worse. Run while you can. They kill who know too much. M." She read it 3 times, her mind reeling. Drugged food. A basement she hadn't even known existed. And the barn. What horrors did it contain? She crossed to her wardrobe, intending to hide the note in her belongings, when she remembered the hollow sound when she'd rapped on the back panel. On impulse, Clara pushed aside her hanging clothes and examined the rear wall of the wardrobe more closely. There, a nearly invisible seam. She pressed along the edge and felt something give. A section of the panel swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage disappearing into darkness. The secret corridor explained why the wardrobe was so deep. It also explained how the Blackwoods could move through the building unobserved, could watch guests without being seen. Clara's skin crawled at the thought of someone standing in this dark space, watching her through some hidden peephole. But the passage might also provide a way to explore without being caught. She memorized its location, closed the hidden door, and rearranged her clothes. Tonight, she decided, she would bring a candle and see where this corridor led. At 11:45 p.m., the hotel finally fell quiet. Clara waited in her darkened room, fully dressed, a small candle and matches in her pocket. At precisely midnight, she heard the soft tap at her door. Daniel's signal. They met in the hallway, speaking in whispers barely louder than breath. Clara showed him Michael's note, watching his face harden with anger and determination. "The boy's risking everything to warn us," Daniel said grimly. "We need to get evidence and get out. But first, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Clara led him to her room and showed him the hidden passage. His eyes widened. "My God, the whole building probably honeycombs with these. That's how they watch everyone. We could use it to search without being seen." Daniel nodded slowly. "You explore the passages, see if you can find a way to the basement. I'm going to break into that locked door under the stairs. It clearly leads somewhere important. If we're not back in our rooms by 4 a.m., we abort and get out at first light. Agreed?" "Agreed. Be careful." "You too, Miss Whitmore. Whatever we find tonight, I suspect it will be ugly." They separated, each carrying the weight of dread mixed with determination. Clara lit her candle and slipped into the hidden passage, pulling the wardrobe panel closed behind her. The corridor was barely 3 feet wide, with a low ceiling that forced her to stoop. The walls were rough wood, and cobwebs caught at her hair and clothes. Every few feet, she discovered peepholes cunningly concealed in decorative elements of the room walls. Knotholes, gaps between boards, the backs of picture frames. The Blackwoods had designed this place for surveillance, for control. How many guests had been watched without their knowledge? How many had discovered the truth too late? The passage twisted and turned, connecting to similar corridors that accessed other rooms. Clara's candle cast dancing shadows that played tricks on her eyes. Once, she thought she saw another figure moving in the darkness ahead, but when she stopped, heart pounding, there was only silence. She found a narrow stairway, descending through the walls, and she followed it down into increasing cold and darkness. The stairs ended at a small door, barely 4 feet high, that opened into what must be the basement Michael had warned about. Clara extinguished her candle before opening the door. Light would give her away instantly. She eased through into a darkness so complete it seemed solid. The smell hit her immediately. Damp earth, rot, and something else. Something chemical and wrong. As her eyes adjusted, she made out dim shapes in the blackness. She risked relighting her candle, shielding it carefully with her hand. The flickering light revealed a nightmare. The basement was divided into sections by heavy curtains. In the nearest section, Clara saw a long table covered with bottles, vials, and medical instruments. Syringes, scalpels, strange devices she couldn't identify. On a shelf above, neat rows of labeled bottles, chloral hydrate, morphine sulfate, laudanum, drugs, more than any legitimate hotel would need, enough to keep multiple people sedated indefinitely. Behind the first curtain, Clara discovered something that made her stomach lurch. Stacks of luggage, trunks, cases, leather bags. She opened the nearest one with trembling hands. Men's clothing, all of it. A leather wallet containing identification papers. Edmund Carver, Boston, Massachusetts. The name from one of the library books. She checked another trunk. Women's dresses, jewelry, personal effects, and more identification. Catherine Mills, New York City. Another name from a library book. The horrible truth crystallized. These weren't borrowed books. They were possessions of people who had never left the Blackwood Hotel. People who had been... Clara's breath came in short gasps. She forced herself to look behind the next curtain, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. More luggage, more names. 7 in total, including... Her heart stopped. A leather satchel with the initials TW embossed on the side. Thomas's bag. His clothes were there, his watch, his pocket knife, everything he'd carried with him. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she couldn't allow herself to break down. Not yet. She needed to know everything. She needed evidence they couldn't deny. The final section of the basement made her understand the true scope of the horror. A heavy door, reinforced with iron bands, stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, Clara could hear water running and smell earth. A tunnel, perhaps, leading somewhere outside. She was about to investigate further when a sound froze her blood. Footsteps on the stairs above. Someone was coming. Clara extinguished her candle and pressed herself into the darkest corner behind the luggage stacks, hardly daring to breathe. A light appeared. A lantern carried by Josiah Blackwood. He descended slowly, humming tunelessly to himself. From her hiding place, Clara watched in horror as he walked to the medical table, selected a syringe, and carefully filled it from one of the bottles. He held it up to the light, checking the dosage, then smiled with satisfaction. "Almost time for the late feeding," he murmured to himself. "Can't have the product growing too agitated. Bad for business. Product." He'd called them product. Clara fought down rising nausea. Josiah moved toward the iron-banded door, and Clara realized with sickening certainty where that tunnel led. The windowless outbuilding. The barn Michael had called worse. That's where they were keeping people. Drugged, imprisoned, helpless. But why? What possible reason could justify such systematic horror? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Josiah spoke again, still alone, but clearly rehearsing something. "Mr. Harrison will arrive Thursday with the payment. 30% for each acquisition, as agreed. The Chicago route is proving most profitable. Travelers going west, no family connections to make inquiries. Perfect inventory." The truth hit Clara like a physical blow. The Blackwood Hotel wasn't just holding people, it was collecting them. acquiring them like merchandise and selling them to someone else for purposes she didn't want to imagine but could guess. Labor trafficking, forced servitude, or worse. The isolated location, the emphasis on discreet travelers, the drugged food, it was all part of a systematic operation. Her brother hadn't simply disappeared. He'd been taken, drugged, and sold like cattle to someone who dealt in human lives. Josiah disappeared through the iron door, taking his light with him. Clara waited in darkness until she was certain he was gone, then fled back up the hidden stairs, her mind reeling, her hands shaking so badly she could barely light her candle. She had to find Daniel. They had to get out and bring the authorities. But even as she thought it, she knew the obstacles they faced. The isolated location, the town's apparent complicity, the Blackwoods' obvious connections to people with money and power. Who would believe them? And could they escape before becoming inventory themselves? Clara emerged into her room just as the first light of dawn began to grey the windows. She'd been in that basement for hours, discovering horrors that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A soft tap at her door announced Daniel's return. She let him in quickly, and they stared at each other, both pale and shaken. "The door under the stairs," Daniel said quietly, his voice hoarse. "It leads to an office. Records, Miss Whitmore. Names, dates, prices. They've been doing this for at least 5 years, dozens of people. And there are names of buyers, wealthy men in Chicago, Philadelphia, even New York. Some want servants who can't complain or leave. Others want workers for factories or mines who'll never demand wages. And some..." He couldn't finish, but Clara understood. Some buyers had darker purposes entirely. "My brother," she whispered. "His things are in the basement. They took him, drugged him, sold him to someone." Daniel gripped her hands. "We have evidence. I took documents, enough to expose the whole operation, but we need to leave immediately. If they discover we know..." A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. They froze, eyes locked on the door. The handle began to turn slowly. Neither Clara nor Daniel moved as the door handle completed its rotation. Time seemed to suspend, stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Then instead of the door bursting open, they heard Adelaide's voice from the hallway, calm, pleasant, and utterly terrifying in its normalcy. "Miss Whitmore? I hope I'm not disturbing you at this early hour, but I've brought your morning tea. I know you mentioned feeling chilled yesterday." Clara's eyes met Daniel's in pure panic. If Adelaide entered and found them both there, discovered them fully dressed at dawn, their escape would become impossible. Daniel pointed urgently toward the wardrobe, the hidden passage. Clara shook her head frantically. If he tried to enter it now, Adelaide would hear the panel moving. "Just a moment, Mrs. Blackwood," Clara called out, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "I'm not quite decent." She gestured for Daniel to hide behind the door, where he'd be concealed when it opened inward. He moved silently into position, pressing himself against the wall. Clara quickly tousled her hair, removed her shoes, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders to suggest she'd just risen from bed. She opened the door just wide enough to accept the tea tray, blocking Adelaide's view of the room. "How thoughtful of you. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood." But Adelaide didn't hand over the tray. Instead, her smile widened, becoming something predatory. "Actually, Miss Whitmore, I wonder if I might have a word about your brother." Clara's blood turned to ice, but she maintained her composure. "Of course. Perhaps after I've had a chance to dress properly?" "I think now would be better, dear." Adelaide pushed past Clara into the room with surprising force. Her eyes immediately found the documents Daniel had stuffed hastily under the bed's edge, one corner visibly protruding. "I see you've been doing some exploring during the night. How industrious." The game was up. Clara abandoned pretense. "Where is my brother? What have you done with him?" Adelaide's pleasant mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Josiah," she called sharply, "we have a situation." Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Within moments, Josiah burst into the room, his face flushed with anger. Behind him came two other men Clara hadn't seen before, large, rough-looking individuals who clearly served as more than simple hotel staff. Daniel emerged from behind the door, positioning himself between Clara and the Blackwoods. "We know everything. The records, the basement, the tunnel to the outbuilding. We know what you've been doing to travelers who pass through here." Josiah's laugh was harsh and devoid of humor. "No, do you? And what exactly do you think you know, Mr. Pierce?" "That you've been drugging guests, holding them prisoner, and making them disappear," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the danger. "We have evidence, documents from your office. If anything happens to us, letters will be sent to authorities in Philadelphia detailing everything." It was a bluff. They'd had no time to send letters, but Daniel delivered it with such conviction that Josiah's confidence wavered momentarily. Adelaide, however, saw through it immediately. "No, you don't. You arrived yesterday afternoon. You've had no opportunity to contact anyone, and the next mail collection isn't until this afternoon. You're quite alone and quite trapped." She nodded to the two large men, who moved forward with practiced efficiency. Daniel fought back, landing one solid punch before being overwhelmed. Clara screamed, trying to help him, but Adelaide grabbed her arm with surprising strength, her fingers digging in painfully. "Take them to the preparation room," Adelaide ordered calmly, as if discussing nothing more consequential than laundry. "We'll need to accelerate our timeline. Mr. Harrison arrives Thursday, but we have contacts who can take immediate delivery if the price is adjusted appropriately." Clara's mind raced frantically as they were dragged from the room and down the hallway. Other doors remained firmly closed. The elderly couple, the businessman, Michael. No one came to help. Either they were too terrified or too complicit in the Blackwoods operation. They were taken down the main stairs, through the lobby, and toward that mysterious locked door beneath the staircase. Josiah produced his ring of keys, unlocking all 3 locks in sequence. The door swung open to reveal steps descending into darkness, a different route to the basement than the hidden passage Clara had used. The preparation room proved to be adjacent to the area where Clara had found the luggage. It contained several narrow cots, all equipped with leather restraints. Medical supplies lined shelves on the walls, and the chemical smell was even stronger here. "You see," Adelaide explained conversationally as the men forced Daniel onto one cot and began securing his wrists, "the Blackwood Hotel serves a very specific clientele. Not our guests, though they believe themselves to be our priority, but rather our business partners. Wealthy industrialists, factory owners, mining operations. They need workers who won't complain, won't organize, won't leave. And we provide that service." Clara struggled violently as they moved toward her, but the man holding her was too strong. He forced her onto another cot. "You're monsters," she spat. "When people learn what you've done, who will tell them?" Josiah interrupted, his earlier joviality completely gone. "The town knows to mind their business. The sheriff knows which side his bread is buttered on. And travelers who come through here looking for missing relatives?" He smiled coldly. "Well, they simply become part of our inventory. It's really quite efficient." "My brother," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Where is he? What have you done with Thomas?" Adelaide's expression showed something that might have been pity, but it was cold and distant. "Your brother was sold 3 months ago to a mining operation in Montana Territory. They needed workers for deep shaft excavation, dangerous work that free men refuse to do. By now he's either acclimated to his new circumstances or..." She shrugged. "The work is quite hazardous. Not everyone survives." The words hit Clara like physical blows. Thomas, trapped in a mine somewhere in the wilderness, enslaved, possibly dead. She had come seeking answers and found only horror. "You won't get away with this," Daniel said, still struggling against his restraints. "People know we came here." "My editor knows." Your editor thinks you're chasing phantoms, Josiah interrupted. You told us as much yourself yesterday. No one is coming to look for you, Mr. Pierce, not for weeks, possibly months. And by then, you'll be far from here, working off your purchase price, in ways you can't begin to imagine. Adelaide prepared a syringe with practiced efficiency, drawing liquid from one of the bottles. This will keep you docile until Mr. Harrison's associate arrives tomorrow. We've had to move quickly before when guests became problematic. The process is quite refined now. Clara watched in horror as Adelaide approached Daniel with the needle. This couldn't be how it ended. Captured, drugged, sold into slavery like cattle. There had to be something she could do, some way to fight back or escape. But the restraints held firm, and her strength was no match for the men who stood guard. She was utterly helpless. Just as Adelaide bent over Daniel's cot, a sudden commotion erupted from upstairs. Shouting, the sound of breaking glass, heavy footsteps running across the floor above. Everyone in the preparation room froze, looking toward the ceiling. What in blazes? Josiah started. One of the guards hurried up the stairs to investigate. Moments later, his shout echoed down. Fire! The kitchen's on fire! Chaos erupted. Josiah and Adelaide exchanged panicked looks. The hotel! Adelaide gasped. Everything we've built, deal with them later, Josiah snapped, already moving toward the stairs. We have to contain the fire before it spreads. This whole building is wood. They rushed out, Adelaide pausing only to lock the door behind them, trapping Clara and Daniel in the basement. The remaining guard shifted nervously, clearly torn between his duty to watch the prisoners and his instinct to help fight the fire. Smoke began seeping under the door and through cracks in the ceiling. The fire was real and spreading fast. Clara could hear shouting, running footsteps, and the ominous crackling of flames consuming wood. "Help us!" Clara called to the guard. "If you leave us here, we'll die! You'll be murderers!" The man's face showed his internal struggle. Whatever else he might be, he apparently hadn't signed up for burning people alive. After a moment's hesitation, he fumbled for keys. "I'm getting you out. But then you run. Don't look back. Don't try to be heroes. Just run, understand?" He released Daniel first, then Clara. Her legs were shaky but functional. Daniel grabbed her hand. "The fire, where did it start? How? Does it matter?" Clara gasped, already moving toward the stairs. "We need to get out." But Daniel paused, looking back at the preparation room, the medical supplies, the evidence of the Blackwood's crimes. "We need proof, something to take with us." He grabbed several of the ledgers from the office area, the ones documenting transactions, names, dates. Clara snatched up documents that had fallen from Josiah's desk in the confusion. They stuffed papers inside their clothing, taking anything that might serve as evidence. The smoke was thicker now, stinging their eyes and lungs. They stumbled up the stairs, emerging into a lobby filled with chaos. Flames engulfed the kitchen and were spreading rapidly through the dining room. The old dry wood of the hotel burned with terrifying speed. Guests and staff ran in all directions. The elderly couple stumbled past, coughing violently. The businessman rushed by carrying a valise, his face covered with a handkerchief. Through the smoke, Clara glimpsed Michael helping others toward the front door, his face set with grim determination. Had Michael started the fire? Had he somehow set them free by creating this distraction? Adelaide appeared through the smoke, her face blackened with soot, her carefully arranged hair disheveled. When she saw Clara and Daniel loose, her eyes widened with fury. "No, Josiah, they're escaping!" But Josiah was desperately trying to organize a bucket brigade, and the fire was beyond control. The hotel that had stood for 25 years, the perfect cover for 25 years of horror, was being consumed by flames. Clara and Daniel ran for the front door, joining the stream of people fleeing the burning building. The cool morning air hit their faces like a blessing as they burst out onto the front porch. Behind them, flames shot through windows, and the roof began to collapse with a tremendous roar. They didn't stop running until they reached the tree line, where they finally paused to look back. The Blackwood Hotel was fully engulfed, a towering inferno against the dawn sky. People stood scattered across the lawn, some coughing, some crying, all watching the destruction of the place that had imprisoned so many. Clara spotted Michael at the edge of the crowd, and their eyes met. He gave her the smallest nod, confirmation of what she'd suspected. He had started the fire. He had saved them. Then he melted into the crowd and disappeared. "We need to keep moving," Daniel said urgently, pulling documents from inside his shirt, "before the Blackwoods organize themselves, before they realize we have evidence." Clara looked back one more time at the burning hotel, thinking of her brother somewhere in Montana, thinking of all the others who had passed through those doors and never emerged. "The town," she said, "the sheriff. They're all complicit. Who can we trust?" "We go to Pittsburgh," Daniel decided, "to the federal marshals. This crosses state lines. It's a federal crime, and I have contacts at newspapers there who'll print the story. Once it's public, the Blackwoods and their partners won't be able to silence us." They began walking down the road toward Millbrook Station, moving quickly but not running. They couldn't afford to draw attention. Behind them, the Blackwood Hotel continued to burn, its dark secrets being consumed by cleansing fire. But Clara knew that destroying the building wasn't enough. The people who had orchestrated this horror, who had profited from it, who had turned human beings into merchandise, they needed to face justice. And the victims, including Thomas, needed to be found and freed. The fight was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. The walk to Millbrook Station took Clara and Daniel nearly 3 hours, their pace slowed by exhaustion and the need to stay off the main road where the Blackwoods might search for them. They moved through the forest parallel to the road, their clothes torn by branches, their faces scratched and smudged with soot from the fire. By mid-morning, they reached the outskirts of town. Millbrook was a small community, perhaps 200 residents, built around the railroad station and a handful of businesses serving travelers. Clara and Daniel knew they needed to be cautious. If the town was as complicit as they suspected, showing themselves openly could be dangerous. "We need to reach the station without being seen," Daniel said, studying the layout from behind a stand of trees. "The next eastbound train should arrive around noon. If we can board it without incident, Mr. Pierce, Miss Whitmore." They spun around to find the station master from the previous day, standing behind them, his weathered face unreadable. Clara's heart sank. They'd been discovered, but instead of calling for help or trying to apprehend them, the old man held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Please don't run. I mean you no harm." Daniel positioned himself protectively in front of Clara, his body tense for flight or fight. "You work for the Blackwoods. You directed us to that hell." "Aye, I did," the station master said heavily, his voice filled with shame. "We all did, the whole town. We sent them travelers who wouldn't be missed, and we looked the other way when people didn't come back. We told ourselves it was none of our business, that we needed the Blackwoods' money to keep the town alive." "You knowingly sent people to be enslaved," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger and disgust. "My brother, I know. God help me, I know." The old man's eyes were haunted. "I've been doing this for 15 years, sending innocents to that place, collecting my silver pieces. I told myself I had no choice, that speaking out would only get me killed too. But last night, when I saw the hotel burning, I knew. The judgment had come, and it was time to stop being a coward." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "This is a list of everyone in Millbrook who took money from the Blackwoods. Every merchant who provided supplies, every official who ignored complaints, every person who helped maintain the silence. It's all documented. Take it. Use it to bring justice." Daniel accepted the envelope warily, checking its contents. Pages of names, dates, amounts paid. It was damning evidence of widespread conspiracy. "Why help us now?" Clara asked. "What's changed?" "Because I'm dying," the station master said simply. "Cancer, maybe 3 months left." I thought I could take my secrets to the grave and let God sort it out, but I can't. I can't die knowing I never tried to make it right. The hotel's gone, but the Blackwoods are alive, and they'll rebuild if they can. You need to stop them. You need to expose everyone who helped them." He gestured back toward the town. "The sheriff is already organizing a search party for you. He's claiming you set the fire, that you're dangerous criminals. The Blackwoods are spinning a story about being victims. If you're caught here, you'll disappear just like all the others. But I can get you on the train. There's a freight car being loaded now, supplies headed to Pittsburgh. You can hide in it until you're far from here." Daniel and Clara exchanged glances. It could be a trap, but they had few options. And something in the old man's haunted eyes suggested his repentance was genuine. "Why should we trust you?" Daniel pressed. "Because I helped send 47 people to that hotel," the station master said, his voice breaking. 47 souls on my conscience. I counted everyone. If I can save just 2, maybe God will show me mercy. Maybe. They followed him into town, moving quickly through back alleys. Millbrook looked peaceful in the morning sun. Flowers in window boxes, shopkeepers sweeping storefronts, children playing in a yard. It was hard to believe an entire community could be complicit in such evil. But Clara was learning that evil rarely looked monstrous. It wore friendly faces and hid behind normal lives. At the freight yard, the station master helped them into a cargo car filled with crates and barrels. "Stay hidden until you're well past the state line. The train stops in Harrisburg around 8 p.m., then continues to Pittsburgh. Don't get off before then. The sheriff has contacts in the smaller towns." "Thank you," Clara said, though the words felt inadequate. "For whatever it's worth, I believe your remorse is real." The old man's eyes glistened. "It's not worth much, but maybe it's something. Maybe it's a start." He hesitated, then added, "Your brother, Thomas Whitmore. I remember him. Kind man, tipped generously. I sent him to the Blackwoods knowing what would happen. I'm so sorry, miss. So terribly sorry." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. The station master closed the freight car door, plunging them into dimness, lit only by gaps between the wooden slats. They sat among the cargo in silence for a long time. Eventually, the train lurched into motion, carrying them away from Millbrook and toward whatever justice they could manage to secure. Daniel examined the documents they'd collected. Ledgers from the hotel, the station master's list of conspirators, and various papers Clara had grabbed during their escape. "This is extensive," he said quietly. "Names, dates, amounts, buyers and sellers. This goes far beyond the Blackwoods. There are people in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, wealthy men, factory owners, mining operations. They all knew they were purchasing enslaved workers." Clara stared through the gaps in the car's walls, watching the Pennsylvania countryside roll past. "How many, do you think? How many people did they take over the years?" "Based on these records, at least 200, possibly more. The hotel's been operating for 25 years. Some years they processed 10 or 12 people, other years more. And those are just the ones documented. There could be others that weren't recorded. 200 lives destroyed. 200 families left wondering what happened to their loved ones. The scale of it was overwhelming. "We'll expose them," Daniel said firmly, seeing her distress. "Every name in these documents, the Blackwoods, their buyers, the townspeople who helped them. I'll write the story. My newspaper contacts will publish it, and we'll demand federal investigation. This is human trafficking on an interstate scale. The government will have to act." "And my brother?" Clara's voice was small. "How do we find him?" Daniel looked at the ledgers, running his finger down columns of names and destinations. "Here, Thomas Whitmore, sold to the Copper Mountain Mining Company, Montana Territory. Purchased by a man named Marcus Holloway, delivered July 22nd, 1892. Clara memorized every detail. Marcus Holloway, Copper Mountain Mining Company, Montana. Thomas had been there for nearly 4 months. 4 months of imprisonment, forced labor, unimaginable conditions, if he was still alive. She couldn't allow herself to think he might be dead. She had to believe he was alive, waiting to be found, waiting for someone to come for him. "After we go to the authorities," she said quietly, "I'm going to Montana. I'm going to find him and bring him home. Miss Whitmore, I'm going," she repeated, her voice hardening with determination. "With or without help. He's my brother. He came on this trip to earn money for us, to secure our future. I won't abandon him." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then I'll come with you. After we've reported everything, after the investigations begin, we'll go to Montana together. You shouldn't face that alone." The train rolled on through the afternoon, carrying them toward Pittsburgh and the fight ahead. They took turns sleeping in short shifts, neither trusting enough to rest completely. Every stop made them tense, expecting the door to be thrown open and the sheriff to drag them out. But the hours passed without incident. By the time darkness fell and the train pulled into Harrisburg, they were stiff, hungry, and exhausted, but still free. "We stay on until Pittsburgh," Daniel reminded her. "Just another 2 hours." The train departed Harrisburg, and Clara finally allowed herself to hope they might actually escape, might actually have a chance to bring the Blackwoods to justice. That hope lasted approximately 30 minutes. The train slowed unexpectedly, the screech of brakes echoing through the freight car. They heard shouts, the sound of many footsteps on gravel beside the tracks. Lanterns swung past the gaps in the walls. "What's happening?" Clara whispered. Daniel peered through a gap. His face went pale. "It's a roadblock! Men with rifles! They're searching the train!" Josiah Blackwood's voice rang out clearly in the night. "We're looking for 2 dangerous fugitives, arsonists who destroyed my property and murdered several hotel guests in the fire. The man is armed and violent." "The woman is his accomplice. Check every car." Clara and Daniel stared at each other in the dimness. The Blackwoods had somehow gotten ahead of them, had organized this interception. Whether through telegrams or fast horses or paid informants, they'd managed to set a trap. "We can't be caught," Clara breathed. "If they take us, we won't be caught." Daniel was already moving, searching the freight car for options. The door was the only exit, and men with rifles waited outside. They were trapped, or were they? Daniel pointed upward. The freight car's roof had a small access hatch used for loading certain types of cargo. It was secured from inside with a simple latch. "Can you climb?" he asked. Clara looked at the crates stacked haphazardly in the car. It would be precarious, but possible. Yes. They moved quickly and quietly, climbing the makeshift ladder of cargo. Daniel reached the hatch first, working the latch as carefully as possible to avoid making noise. It opened with a faint creak. Cold night air rushed in. Daniel pulled himself through the opening, then reached down to help Clara. She grasped his hands, and he hauled her up onto the roof of the freight car. They lay flat against the cold metal, barely breathing, as lantern lights swept past below. Men were opening doors, searching car after car, working their way down the train. "When they open our car," Daniel whispered directly into Clara's ear, "we move to the next car. We stay ahead of them on the rooftops until the train starts moving again. Then we jump." "Jump? While the train's moving? Better than being caught." The logic was sound, but the prospect was terrifying. Still, Clara nodded. They had no choice. Below them, the freight car door slammed open. "Check behind every crate," Josiah's voice commanded. "They're here somewhere. They have to be." Daniel and Clara crawled along the roof toward the next car. The gap between cars yawned below them. If they fell between the cars, they'd be crushed when the train moved. Clara focused on Daniel's back, on moving carefully, on not looking down. They made it to the next car as men climbed into their former hiding place. They could hear crates being moved, contents being dumped out. "Not here!" someone called. "The car's empty." "Impossible," Josiah snarled. "Search again." But other searchers were already moving to the next cars. Clara and Daniel had to keep moving, car by car, staying ahead of the systematic search. They crossed 3 more freight cars, their hands raw from gripping cold metal, their bodies exhausted. Then finally, mercifully, the train whistle blew. The engineer was ready to continue the journey. The searchers would have to conclude their fugitives weren't aboard. "No!" Josiah's voice rose to a scream. "Keep searching! Don't let this train move!" But the train was already beginning to roll, slowly gathering speed. The searchers jumped off, not wanting to be carried away from their horses and vehicles. Clara and Daniel clung to the roof as the train accelerated. They were getting away. They'd escaped the trap. "We should stay on now," Clara called over the wind. "We're free!" But Daniel was looking ahead, and his expression filled with new alarm. He pointed. Down the track, perhaps a half-mile ahead, another group of men had positioned themselves. They were laying something across the rails. A barricade. They were going to derail the train. "They're going to crash us," Daniel said, his voice grim. "They'd rather kill everyone on board than let us escape with evidence." The Blackwood's depravity knew no bounds. They would murder dozens of innocent people, the engineers, other passengers, cargo workers, just to silence two witnesses. "We jump now," Daniel said, "before we get to that barricade. The train's not going too fast yet. We might survive." Might? Better odds than staying on when it derails. He was right. Clara looked at the ground rushing past below, a blur of gravel, grass and darkness. She thought of Thomas waiting in a mine somewhere, depending on her to bring help. She thought of the 200 other victims who needed justice. She couldn't die here, not when there was so much left to do. "Together," she said, gripping Daniel's hand. "On three." They crawled to the edge of the car roof. Below them, the ground rushed past at terrifying speed. Ahead, the barricade grew closer. 1. Clara took a deep breath, committing herself to the action. 2. Daniel squeezed her hand, his face set with determination. 3. They jumped into darkness. The impact drove the breath from Clara's lungs. She hit the grassy embankment and rolled violently down the slope, her body tumbling over rocks and through brush. Pain exploded in her shoulder, her hip, her ribs. The world spun in a chaos of darkness and stars. She came to rest at the bottom of the embankment, gasping for air, every part of her body screaming in protest. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, could only lie there, struggling to breathe. "Miss Whitmore," Daniel's voice came from somewhere nearby, hoarse and desperate. "Clara, answer me." "Here," she managed to croak. "I'm here." She heard him scrambling down the slope. Then his hands were on her shoulders, checking her for injuries. "Can you move? Anything broken?" Clara tested her limbs carefully. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. "I think I'm all right. Bruised, very bruised, but whole. Thank God." Daniel helped her sit up slowly. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his coat was torn, but he seemed otherwise intact. Behind them, up the tracks, they heard the screech of brakes as the train engineer spotted the barricade. The train was slowing, stopping short of the obstruction. There were shouts, confusion, angry voices demanding to know what was happening. "We need to move," Daniel said urgently. "They'll search the area. We can't be found here." He helped Clara to her feet. Her entire body protested, but adrenaline carried her forward. They stumbled away from the tracks, deeper into the forest that bordered the railway line. Behind them, they could hear Josiah's voice raised in fury, demanding the train be searched again. But the engineer was refusing, his own voice sharp with anger. Attempting to derail a passenger train was criminal. People could have been killed. He was taking his train to the next station and reporting this incident to the authorities. The Blackwoods had overplayed their hand. In their desperation to stop Clara and Daniel, they'd committed a crime too public to hide, too serious for even corrupt local officials to ignore. Clara and Daniel walked through the night forest for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the train tracks. Clara's injuries made every step agony, but she refused to stop. They had evidence, they had names, they had the truth. They just needed to survive long enough to share it. Dawn found them on the outskirts of a small town, not Millbrook, but a place called Riverside, according to a weathered sign. It was larger than Millbrook, with actual streets and numerous businesses. More importantly, it was outside the Blackwood's immediate sphere of influence. They staggered into the town's only hotel, a modest establishment nothing like the Blackwood, where the proprietor took one look at their battered, filthy appearance and nearly turned them away. But Daniel produced money and his press credentials, explaining they'd been in a train accident and needed rooms to rest and recover. The story satisfied the proprietor's curiosity. Within an hour, they had rooms, hot baths, food, and for the first time in days, relative safety. Daniel used the hotel's telegraph to send coded messages to his editor in Philadelphia and to federal marshals in Pittsburgh. Help was coming, but it would take time. They needed to lie low, recover, and most importantly, safeguard the evidence. Over the next 3 days, as their bodies healed from the train jump, Clara and Daniel organized their documentation. They made multiple copies of the most critical pages, names of buyers, lists of victims, the station master's confession, and hid them in separate locations. If the Blackwoods found them, if they managed to destroy one set of evidence, others would survive. On the 4th day, Daniel's editor arrived from Philadelphia, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. The meeting took place in Daniel's hotel room, with Clara present to give her testimony. The marshals, stern, professional men who'd seen their share of criminal enterprise, listened to the entire story with increasingly grave expressions. They examined the documentation, cross-referencing names and dates. Their questions were sharp and thorough, but not skeptical. This was clearly not the first time they'd encountered human trafficking operations, though perhaps never one so systematic and long-running. "This is substantial," the senior marshal, a man named Morrison, said finally. "Enough for federal warrants. We'll need to move quickly before word spreads and the principals flee." "The town of Millbrook is complicit," Clara reminded him. "The local sheriff is on their payroll. You can't trust local authorities." "We won't," Morrison assured her. "We'll bring federal officers. We'll arrest everyone named in these documents, the Blackwoods, the townspeople who assisted them, and we'll begin tracking down the buyers. This will be a large-scale operation." Daniel's editor, a shrewd man named Garrett, had been studying the documents with a journalist's eye for story. "This is the biggest exposé of the decade," he said. "When this breaks, it'll shake the nation. But Miss Whitmore, Mr. Pierce, you understand you'll be central figures in this. Your names will be in every newspaper. The attention will be intense." Clara had considered this. The thought of publicity made her uncomfortable. She was a private person by nature. But Thomas and all the other victims deserved justice, and justice required sunlight. "I understand," she said quietly. "Print the story. Let the whole country know what happened in that hotel." Over the next week, events unfolded rapidly. Federal marshals descended on Millbrook with warrants for dozens of arrests. The Blackwoods were apprehended trying to flee westward with what remained of their money. The sheriff, the station master, and numerous townspeople were taken into custody. The outbuildings were searched, revealing evidence that confirmed every horrible detail of Clara and Daniel's account. Daniel's article, titled "The House of Horrors: How a Pennsylvania Hotel Became a Prison for the Innocent," appeared in newspapers across the country. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. People were shocked, outraged, demanding justice not just for the Blackwoods, but for everyone involved. Congressional hearings were called. Investigations expanded to the buyers. Wealthy men who'd thought themselves untouchable suddenly found federal agents at their doors with very uncomfortable questions. Several committed suicide rather than face trial. Others claimed ignorance, insisted they'd believed they were hiring legitimate workers, but their own correspondence betrayed them. The Copper Mountain Mining Company in Montana was among the first operations raided. Federal marshals, accompanied by journalists and photographers, descended on the remote mining camp, expecting to find enslaved workers in terrible conditions. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Clara received the telegram 3 weeks after the initial arrests. Copper Mountain raided, 37 workers found in captivity, conditions horrific. Thomas Whitmore located, alive, severely malnourished and injured, but recovering, will be transported to Pittsburgh General Hospital. Suggest you travel there immediately. Marshal Morrison. Clara read the telegram 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Alive. Thomas was alive. She took the next train to Pittsburgh, Daniel accompanying her. The journey took 2 days. 2 days during which Clara's emotions cycled between relief, dread, hope, and fear. Thomas was alive, but what condition would he be in? What had 4 months of slavery and forced labor done to him physically and mentally? Pittsburgh General Hospital was a large, imposing building. A nurse led Clara and Daniel to a ward on the 3rd floor, where the rescued miners were being treated. The hallway was lined with beds, each containing a man who looked more like a skeleton than a human being. They were emaciated, scarred, haunted, and in the bed at the end of the row was Thomas. Clara barely recognized her brother. He'd lost perhaps 40 pounds from his already lean frame. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. Bandages covered his hands. Daniel later learned his fingers had been injured in mining accidents. But when he saw Clara approaching, something sparked in those hollow eyes. Clara. His voice was a rasp, barely audible. Is it really you? She rushed to his bedside, taking his bandaged hand as gently as possible. It's me, Thomas. I'm here. You're safe now. You're free. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I was sure I'd die there. They said no one was looking for me, that I'd been forgotten. Never, Clara said fiercely. I never stopped looking, never stopped trying to find you. Over the following hours, as doctors checked Thomas's condition and adjusted his treatments, Clara and Daniel learned the full scope of what Thomas and the others had endured. The Copper Mountain operation had kept workers in barracks, surrounded by armed guards. They were forced into the mines for 12-hour shifts with minimal food and rest. Injuries were common, medical care non-existent. Those who tried to escape were beaten or worse. Marcus Holloway, Thomas said, his voice filled with hate when he spoke the name. He ran the operation, treated us like animals, less than animals. We were just tools to be used up and discarded. He's in federal custody, Daniel told him, along with everyone else involved. They'll stand trial. They'll face justice. Justice. The word felt both powerful and inadequate. Thomas was alive and free, but he'd carry the scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of his life, as would all the other survivors. The trials began 6 months later and dominated headlines for over a year. The Blackwoods were convicted of multiple counts of kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. They received life sentences in federal prison. Josiah Blackwood died within 2 years. Adelaide lasted longer, spending 15 years in prison before her death in 1909. The buyers and accomplices faced varying sentences depending on their level of involvement. Some received lengthy prison terms. Others paid massive fines and faced financial ruin as their businesses collapsed under the weight of scandal. The town of Millbrook never recovered. Most residents moved away, unable to live with the shame of what they'd enabled. Marcus Holloway and the operators of other mining and factory operations that had purchased enslaved workers faced the harshest sentences. Several were hanged for murder, workers who died under their control, their deaths finally recognized as homicides. The federal government passed new laws, strengthening penalties for human trafficking and creating better mechanisms for investigating missing persons across state lines. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was progress. Clara used money from a book she wrote about her experiences to establish the Whitmore Foundation. dedicated to helping survivors of human trafficking rebuild their lives. The foundation helped former captives find legitimate employment, access medical care, and reconnect with families. Thomas never fully recovered physically. His injured hands meant he couldn't return to his former profession, but he found purpose working with Clara at the foundation. He spoke at congressional hearings, gave interviews, and became a voice for the voiceless. Helping others heal seemed to help him heal as well. Daniel continued his investigative journalism, but the Blackwood story became his defining work. He won numerous awards and eventually wrote a comprehensive book documenting not just the hotel itself, but the broader systems that had allowed such horror to persist for so long. He remained close friends with Clara and Thomas, the bond forged in that terrible experience never fading. 3 years after the Blackwood Hotel burned to the ground, Clara returned to the site. The ruins had been cleared, the property seized by the federal government. Where the hotel once stood, only foundations remained, dark stones jutting from overgrown grass. She stood there alone, remembering the fear, the horror, the desperation, but also remembering the courage, hers, Daniel's, Michael's, and all those who'd finally stood up against evil. A marker had been placed on the site, listing the names of all confirmed victims. 217 names, including many who'd never been found, but whose existence was documented in the Blackwood's meticulous records. At the bottom, an inscription, "In memory of those who suffered here. May their stories ensure such evil never prospers in silence again." Clara placed flowers at the base of the monument, a small gesture, but all she could offer to people she'd never met, but whose fates had become intertwined with her own. "We didn't save everyone," she said softly to the names carved in stone, "but we saved some, and we made sure the world knew. I hope that's enough." She turned and walked away from the ruins, back to the road where Daniel was waiting with a carriage. They were returning to Philadelphia, to the foundation, to the ongoing work of helping survivors and preventing future tragedies. The Blackwood Hotel was gone, but its legacy remained, both the horror it represented and the justice that had finally brought it down. Evil had thrived there for 25 years, protected by silence, complicity, and the simple act of looking away. But in the end, 2 people who refused to look away had brought it crashing down. And in that, Clara found a truth worth carrying forward, that ordinary people, armed with courage and determination, could stand against even systematic evil and sometimes, just sometimes, could win. The fight wasn't over. Human trafficking still existed, still destroyed lives. But the Blackwood case had shown that such criminals weren't untouchable, that their operations could be exposed, that justice was possible. As the carriage rolled away from that cursed place, Clara looked to the future with a mixture of sadness for what had been lost and hope for what could still be saved. The dead couldn't be brought back, but the living could be helped. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could be protected. And that, she decided, was enough to keep fighting for. If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from history. The fight against human trafficking continues today. If you or someone you know needs help, please reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Thank you for listening, and remember, evil thrives when good people remain silent. Never stop speaking out.